Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Lana McGilvray, co-founder and CEO of Purpose Worldwide. Lana, it is a delight to be talking with you. I'm excited about our conversation. I know we love these topics. So welcome, welcome, welcome to the show.
Deb, thank you so much. It's great to be together again.
It is. And I have to say that I just love Zoom, for all of those reasons. We feel like we're in each other's homes, which is wonderful. So I opened up talking a little bit about purpose and your company, Purpose Worldwide. Um, you say that your purpose is to help clients define and connect purpose to growth. Now, I know that growth is obviously one of the hottest topics these days, or maybe it's a perpetual business topic. But just let's open it up by talking about what growth means for you in this context, and actually how long it takes for growth to be noticeable.
Deb, that's such a great question and such a meaty one. And I'm so excited to have the conversation with you around it today. So it is true that our own purpose is to connect our clients' purpose to growth. And there are different measures, but at the end of the day, unless we're able to show growth, we really can't drive the outcomes that the clients are coming to us for. And in our particular case at Purpose, which is a marketing, communications, and relationship development firm, we need to be able to show that accountability. So in terms of growth, it can be different for each of the clients. And to your point, it's very loud right now. The economy is at an interesting time. So I'd love to kind of talk about that a little bit today as well. But in terms of what we do every day here, we're working with large global brands, in some cases NGOs, but more and more the technology firms and the investors that are also supporting them. Those are different stakeholders. And so when we're speaking to a CMO, that growth might be top of the funnel awareness, but more and more it comes down to economic growth. And so one thing that has been easier lately, more difficult in the past, is being able to tie economic growth to purpose. And I am happy to say, as we get maybe more into the conversation today, I'll be able to give you great examples, including a super great example from Harvard Business Review that ties to Mattel and some work that our bridge client has been doing as well.
No, it's interesting, and I think one of the things, and particularly with topics that have become buzzword topics, sometimes people don't kind of go below the surface of the iceberg and realize just how much development there is on these topics and the evolution in terms of the tangibles, the accountability that you mentioned in terms of tying things like purpose, which started out as being a bit ephemeral, to things like economic growth. Um, Interesting that you talk about that because not long ago we did a survey which we called Purpose or Profits, and I think that we're figuring out how it can be both. But let's you talked about a little bit, you touched on economics, but let's also talk about crises in general now, whether it be economic or some of the geopolitical crises we're seeing or polarizing events that are going on. Um, I know this is a challenging area, and our own research is finding that marketers are finding it more difficult to express messages of purpose during times of crises. And it does seem like we're in perpetual crises. So I wonder if this is another tricky part to the whole evolution of this concept.
Oh, Deb, I have so many feelings about that as a past researcher and as somebody that has been responsible for communications on behalf of brands and agencies, sometimes during points of crisis. And I will say, I'm fortunate because right now, across the client base, we are serving a wide swath of global clients. And I'd love to hear actually a little bit more about your research. But sometimes I do think when we ask the questions, we get answers that are factual and do reflect the sentiment of most. But I do believe, based on some of the primary conversations we're having, so not the wider research that you've been doing, I actually have two perspectives. So I do think it's harder in some respects to defend it for many of the companies probably that you were surveying. Now, I think that there's some that double down on purpose in terms of crisis. And so I'd love to chat about that a little bit. One thing that we've been discovering, especially through some of the global organizations, I think of Bridge, which is a DEI trade organization, is a shining example of this. The vice chair of Bridge is a woman named, is an individual named Yin Murani, and she's one of the few CMOs that actually became a CEO. And one of the things that she says is you measure what you treasure. And so, first of all, we have to be able to measure things, whether it's purpose or other things. And then one of the other things we've been speaking a lot within Bridge about is it's very difficult to measure purpose if it's a silo measurement. So if somebody's responsible for DEI and that's one office, or somebody's responsible for sustainability and it's one office, and it's not a shared goal, then you might be set up for failure, especially if the economy is not in a great state. Now, if those things that are purpose-driven across your organization, whether they're commercial purposes or sustainability purposes or inclusivity purposes, are tied to the goals of the organization, and then you're able to measure it up against those goals and show that they're driving impact, then you're really set up for success. And I think one of the biggest ones this year is the Barbie movie, right? So we can see the economic impact that it had. And now that there's been numerous studies around the inclusive message that they were sending, the turnaround of a heritage brand, and how good that's been. So I definitely would love to learn more about your research. But again, I think when we ask those questions, sometimes the responses we get are tied to the environment or the context we're in. Does that make sense?
It does, and I always love the Barbie example, because we gave an award to Barbie very early on, when it started to show how it helped young girls, think imaginatively about being anything they could be. And that segment, which was part of their case study for the award, was actually in the movie. So I was like kind of, loud at that moment in the movie. Of course, I went with a group of women all dressed in pink, but we, for whatever reasons, it was a fun time. But now you're seeing Barbie reaching out and doing things like sponsoring, women's hockey now, the women's hockey pro team, which I think is wonderful, because I remember joking once, that Barbie had done an Angela Merkel Barbie when she was the chancellor of Germany, and of course she looked a little bit different than the real Angela Merkel. Um, so now I'm kind of envisioning the hockey Barbie, but I think it's just fun, as as someone. But back to, I know we digress, but I think that the joy of digressing is to going through the examples that make some of this come to life. And let me ask you something else as we move in just in this direction. You talked about your experience that you have with brands, you have with associations, nonprofits, technology companies, and some of their investors and stakeholders, shareholders for that matter. So what, just in general terms, what do you find is the biggest challenge that people face when trying to adopt a purpose agenda? Is it the siloed issues, or is it something else? Is it not going back to origins? What is it?
I think it could be consensus around the purpose. And I think maybe the fortunate thing for Fortune 500 and Global 1000 companies is they generally do have solid missions or a purpose. You can go to any of their annual reports, and I mean, everybody can go do this research. Go find an annual report and go do a search and look for mission. You're going to find a mission and perhaps a purpose more and more these days, since the Purpose Pledge was taken. I think it was 2019 when most of the companies signed up for the Purpose Pledge. Uh, those companies actually spend quite a bit of time in the C-suite discussing their purpose. And it has been harder, but generally you will find them. I would say that I haven't done the research, perhaps the internationalist has. I bet it's the meaty middle, and it's the companies below that level that don't necessarily have a mission or purpose in place. And so if there's not consensus at the leadership level first and then across the organization, then you could really be struggling, especially if you end up in a crisis. And there's so many great businesses in that meaty middle that are doing phenomenally. And I bet a purpose would actually help separate them from the pack if they could come up with the words for it. Let's think of credit unions, right? How many great credit unions exist around the world to serve clients? If you think hyper locally or even nationally, there are so many quick service restaurants or so many public libraries or things that could advantage. And so getting that consensus from an organization that might not have um, institutionally the appetite to be talking about things like purpose or mission because every day they may be struggling to chase revenue or things like that. I think it would be more difficult there because purpose is the first thing clients can attach to when they end up in either a crisis situation or in a growth opportunity situation. Because if everybody is rallying around the same thing, it becomes quicker and more efficient to get to the answers because can go beyond that quickly. And I think of REI making business decisions not to partner with certain companies because it would be so anti-purpose. And when you know that, you can quickly make decisions. It's a really interesting question.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that really embedding purpose within an organization makes decision making easier, particularly in these moments of crises or polarization. So many people are fearful that brands will be attacked if they accidentally do the wrong thing, even with good intentions. And I think that if purpose is clear, you know when to be quiet. You know when to jump on a bandwagon because it is what you're all about. And so I think it's interesting. You're right about the meaty middle, though. In at least my experience is that for a lot of people, finding that point to rally around can be difficult. In that sometimes it's not aspirational enough or sweeping enough to
Mhm.
be able to really mobilize people to want to be part of it. So it's interesting. And of course, I'd love to hear what you think about all the things that have come up now. We now have all sorts of new words connected with purpose. We've got purpose washing and purpose fatigue. We coined, again, due to one of the insight surveys that we did, the purpose gap, where actions don't live up to, a stated expression of purpose. There's also the green hush now that we hear about, where people are afraid to yell about what they're doing in a positive way too loudly, because they fear that it'll be considered purpose washing or whatever it is. I mean, it's a funny time to exist and to get it right. I'd be curious as to what you think. Clearly, it's more difficult to communicate this now.
It's a desperately difficult time to communicate purpose